Hello. This week we're looking at bodies. Yay! So, you've got a body, I've got a body, everyone has a body. Talk about bodies and media technology. So the main takeaway from this week is that representations of and ideas around the body and new media technologies are deeply entangled with each other. We understand new technology through the body, in particular the sexual and gendered body, and our thinkings around the sexual body are also informed by new media technology. So I'm going to be looking at a few historical examples today that are really interesting. One is the history of hysteria in women, and the other is ghost photography, and both illustrate how Victorian understandings of the body were really kind of entangled with how people greeted the new medium of photography. So the example of documenting female hysterics through photography shows that the medicalization and sometimes invention of mental illness is sometimes informed by our instruments of measurement. And the example of ghost photography shows that the gendered body serves as a kind of canvas for working through the possibilities of photography when it was new. So these examples pose some questions around current technology, including what constructions of the body inform our thinking about media at the moment? For example, how do our ideas around the perfect body or perfect vision inform the ways we understand media technologies around us? Also, how does new media technology inform the ways we think about the body? So both of these are very kind of important questions when we're exploring the relationship between media and the body. So let's turn our attention to the weird history of female hysteria. When photography was invented, it was integrated into all sorts of industries as a new and exciting technology that offered new potentials. And it was similarly integrated into medical sort of professions. In 1888, it came to Savitry Hospital in Paris, where women with the supposed illness of hysteria were treated under the care of Dr. Jean-Martin Charcot, who was Sigmund Freud's mentor. So he was the kind of guy who influenced Sigmund Freud. Hysteria as an illness was just being discovered at the time. Symptoms included spastic fits interspersed with melancholia or paralysis, among a host of other symptoms. As a disease, it was limited predominantly to women with the occasional effeminate gay man. And the thinking was that it was due to disturbances in the womb, and that the reason why you were having all these fits was because your womb was wandering about inside your body. Bad womb, stay in place. It also manifested itself in the form of sexual dysfunction, so either a disinterest in sex or over appetite for sex in women. So if your wife was listless and prone to angry outbursts and not doing housework, you might diagnose her with hysteria. And, many women were institutionalized against their will, under these sort of headings of hysteria. One treatment that was later developed was psychotherapy by Freud, in which he led his hysterical patients, women mostly, to kind of admit that they wanted to have sex with their fathers, which is kind of part of the Oedipal complex for Freud. But you can read all about that online. I'm sure you've heard of it before. But that was sort of Freud's interpretation of why women were hysterical. And this, the history of treating hysteria is quite problematic. There are kind of methods of male doctors sort of sexually assaulting female patients as a form of sort of treatment. The earliest forms of the modern day vibrator come from the history of hysteria as a form of treatment for women. On the other hand, if you were oversexed, you were placed in these, that's for women who were undersexed. If you were oversexed, you were placed in these padded pants that prevented you from accessing any of your nether regions. So there was all this bizarre stuff going on in the Victorian era and its treatment of hysteria. So now what people today believe, so scholars of the history of medicine believe, is that women with a host of other illnesses were misdiagnosed with this now debunked illness. So that sort of constituted one part of the hysterics kind of, public, or people who were diagnosed with hysteria. The other sort of part was women and men who just didn't fit into heteronormative gender roles and would have been institutionalized under the heading of having hysteria. One scholar called Ulrich Baer argues something very interesting about the relationship between hysteria and photography. So this belief about hysteria was only in development around this time, and he argues that the use of photography and public display of hysteria actually contributed to and shaped the formulation of this illness. That without photography, in other words, the shape that the discourse of hysteria took would be completely different. And he looked at two things: photographs documenting hysteria, which played a vital part of its study, and two, accounts of the theatrical displays of hysteria. So in terms of the theatrical displays, it was what Dr. Charcot would do is he would, get a bunch of medical students together who wanted to learn about hysteria and put them in a room, an amphitheater, and then he would take one of his, female patients, and she would have a hysterical fit in the middle of the room, and everyone would kind of go, "Whoa," and study her. It's quite convenient that, women tended to have fits when they were in this kind of amphitheater-like space, kind of suggesting that people felt maybe under pressure to kind of elicit or sort of manifest certain symptoms in front of an audience. So Baer looks at these, but he also looks at photography, and photography was used to document hysterical fits and paralysis, and sort of as a method of measuring it, as a method of investigating it, in the same way that Muybridge was doing similar things for kind of horse racing, which we kind of looked at a couple weeks ago. And Baer argues that women performed symptoms in rhythm to the photographic process, spasming and then freezing, spasming and then falling into paralysis. So the mechanics of this new technology shaped the diagnosis and very understanding of this medical illness. Now, he argues that women probably were conscious of their performances, or they may have been more subconscious in the form of a kind of a Stockholm syndrome of exhibiting sort of symptoms in a certain way in front of the camera in order to kind of please people who were basically in charge of you, especially if you were in that institution against your kind of will. Now, vestiges of hysteria persisted into the 1960s, with women being diagnosed as hysterical, and the disease was formally retired from the DSM-R in 1980. And I would argue that echoes of this kind of diagnosis reach even until today, with the trope of people saying something like, "Oh, that's my crazy girlfriend," or "that girl's crazy." We tend to sort of dismiss sort of feelings and sort of resistances to social norms in women as hysterical, as crazy, as nuts. Okay, so this is all very interesting and a little disturbing, Alex, but how does it relate to your projects? If your device is bodily, especially, you may want to ask, is it encouraging the body to behave in certain ways by virtue of just measuring it and wearing it? Will people modify their bodies or bodily behavior to sync with your device? And what are the possible ramifications of that? Are you kind of targeting potentially vulnerable bodies? Bodies who will perform certain things for you because that's what they think you want to see. There's a power dynamic between the body and a new media technology that should be acknowledged here and should be sort of taken into consideration in your design. And that's the lesson that we can learn from Dr. Charcot and the Hospital of La Salpêtrière, as well as just like, don't lock people up don't lock people up and make them perform mental illnesses in front of, masses of people in amphitheaters, and don't photograph them, for gosh sakes, when they're kind of having mental health issues. So that's another lesson we can take from that history. But the primary lesson in the context of this class is that the notions of the body and the way the body behaves and media technology measurements of the body are closely related at all times.